shack of the scholar. They were singing and dancing, and they were so excited. They didn't know why, but they just were. Finally, they arrived at a big orchard. There was a small shack, so they walked over and knocked on the door, and a man came out, the scholar. He said, "Are you lost?" He had never expected that anyone would want to ask him questions. As I said, Islam wasn't so popular at the time. And they looked at him kind of funny, and they said, "No, we're here to ask you questions." And he looked at them and he said, "Questions?" His hospitality switch turned on, and he let them come into his house, and he said, have a seat, please." And he asked them if they wanted tea or coffee, anything, but they declined. "How about cake or cookies?" Again, they declined. All they wanted was the sweet taste of humiliating him. Finally, he told them to sit down, and he said, "Let's get to those questions." He was very excited, but tried to hide it a bit. And so the first teen stood up and he said, "Okay, you Muslims say that God exists, but if God exists, why don't I see him?" The second that the teen said that, the scholar's heart sank. He had so much hope that they actually wanted to learn, but they didn't. They just wanted to embarrass him. "Oh, okay," he said. "Next question." So the second teen stood up smiling because, well, the scholar was frowning, and he said, "Okay, you Muslims say that there's going to be an afterlife. Sounds very real. And in this afterlife, the good will be rewarded and the bad will be punished. Now, Satan, the baddest of them all, will obviously be punished, but minor detail. The punishment is a tormenting fire, and Satan is made out of fire. So how will fire be punished by fire?" And the scholar said, "Oh, that's a good question. Next question." And so 13 stood up. He was being very cocky, and he said, "Okay, I don't have a question. I have a comment. Is that okay?" Well, the scholar didn't care. They didn't care. "Yeah, go ahead with your comment." And so he stood up and he said, "Okay, so you Muslims say that we have fate and destiny, qada and qadar. But then, when we do something bad, which is just part of our fate and destiny, we get in trouble? That's not fair. We're following the play and the script of God. We're puppets, and we get punished for that?" Said the scholar. "Never thought of it that way. Guess it isn't fair." So the teen looked at him and he said, "So, do you have any answers?" And he thought for a while, and finally, he went down. He scooped up some dirt and said, "Here." And he threw the dirt in their faces, and they ran away from the shack and away from the orchard. He sighed. It had been such a day. He had so much hope they wanted to learn something. Of course they didn't. He walked over to his nightstand, and there was a candle on it. He blew it out. It was the only light in his house, and so now it was pitch black. He lay down in his bed, and he went to sleep. The next morning, he was awakened by knocks on his door. He finally went out to the door, and that tall, stern-looking man looked at him and he said, "Oh, noble scholar, you are needed at court immediately." Oh no, he knew what this was about. The 3 teens, they went and snitched on him. "Oh, okay. Well, let me go get dressed," he said. "Well, I'm not supposed to let you do that, but okay." The stern man walked away, and the scholar went over to his closet. He was humble, down to earth. He didn't care what people thought of him, and he didn't care about materialistic things. So he didn't really have anything too presentable. But he had to fix something up because he was going to court. He looked at his small closet, and I know, I'm a girl. No. Finally, he went to the back of his closet, an outfit that he hadn't worn ever. It had collected some dust over the years, but it would do. It was the most presentable thing that he had. He put it on, and off he was to court. When he arrived at the courtroom, he passed the judge. The judge was very stern, and he looked like he never smiled in his life, or laughed. But the scholar wasn't scared. He passed by the stands where the family and friends of the 3 teens were pointing at him and laughing. "Oh, that's where they got their attitude from," he said. He went down and he sat, and he looked at the 3 teens who were also laughing and pointing at him. Finally, the judge stood up and said, "All right, let's get this case on the road." So he looked at the scholar and he said, "Okay, noble scholar, these 3 teens accused you of last night throwing dirt in their faces. Is this true?" "It's true," said the scholar. Everyone was pretty surprised. They thought he would lie his way through this case, but he didn't. He admitted the truth. Well, after the judge kind of recuperated, he said, "Okay, but why'd you do it?" And he said, "That was my answer. They asked me questions. I answered them." And the first teen stood up and he said, "No, we just asked you innocent questions and you threw dirt in our face. That's not fair." And so he looked at him and he said, "You didn't ask me innocent questions. You tried to embarrass me and humiliate me. But that was the answer." "May I please explain myself?" he asked the judge. So the judge let him. And he told the first teen to stand up, and he said, "Okay, you asked me yesterday, if God exists, why don't you see him? Now, what did I do yesterday?" And teen looked at him and he said, "You threw dirt in my face." And he says, "Well, that hurt, didn't it?" "Of course it hurt. You threw dirt in my face," said the first teen. And he says, "Well, can you show me the pain?" "Well, of course not. It's pain." He sat down. He understood what was going on. The noble scholar said, "See, just because you can't see something, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist." And so the second teen stood up and he said, "Okay, but you still didn't have the right to throw dirt in my face." "Maybe I did," he said. "Now, what did you ask me last night?" And he looked at him and he said, "Well, I asked you, how can Satan, made out of fire, be punished by fire?" And so the scholar looked at him and he says, "Okay, so do you like science?" "Yeah," said the teen, and he was wondering where this was all going, but he was pretty nervous because, well, what happened to the first teen? And so the scholar told him, "Now, what are humans made of?" And he says, "We're made of water, we're made of dirt." He sat down. Again, he knew where this was going. The scholar looked at him and he said, "See, yesterday I threw dirt on you, and you're partially made of dirt. Now, if I, a mere man, can do that, what puts doubt in your mind and in your heart that God can do that? He's God." The 13th stands up and he says, okay, but I didn't even ask a question. See, I said a comment. So you didn't have the right to do that to me." And he looks at him and he says, "Well, I'm sorry, I'm just following the script of God. It's not fair to punish me." He sits down and tries to come up with something to say, but he can't. And so the judge smiles, probably the first time in years, and he says, "Wow, I guess it's pretty clear who this case goes to. The noble scholar." And then he looks at the scholar and he says, "You know, you're not just noble, you're wise too, wiser than I will ever be. So why don't you decide the punishment of these 3 boys?" Oh, and they were so scared he was going to come up with something terrible. But he looked at them, seeing the fear in their eyes, and he said, "No, I'm generous too. So for the next 2 months, you'll be working for me. I have a big orchard, and I'm an old man, so you'll help me maintain it, and my shack." "Generous? That's the worst thing ever," they moaned. And the judge looked at them and scolded them, so they sat down. And for the next 2 months, they worked for him, maintaining his orchard and helping out around the house, but he was generous. He gave them gems. Well, he wasn't rich, but he still gave them gems of knowledge and gems of hope, gems of nobility, and he taught them to be wise. And let's just say, after he was done with them, they would never do anything like this again. Thank you.